So picture it's 1996, and you have a few different things they need to pick up. You've got some hardware, say a shovel. You need to go clothes shopping. You need to go grocery shopping. You have to pick up some just simple electronics, maybe a new AC adapter for one of the, a million items that need them. An array of different things that at the time, probably you wouldn't be buying in the same place. Maybe you would go to a department store, but for most people, unless they've got a mall nearby, it's certainly a possibility, you would be going to a number of different stores. As opposed to today, you may simply go to Walmart. So, 1996, you go to get your shovel. You go into the hardware store, and there's maybe 5 to 8 people wandering around looking for different hardware supplies. There are a few employees there, maybe 3 or 4, something like that. You've got someone maybe stocking shelves, or a couple of people talking to customers and helping them find what they need. One person standing at the counter. All of them are getting paid maybe a little bit above minimum wage at the time, which, considering the flat wages for the past 30 years, would be, substantially more economically than they would necessarily be making now. But they're not overworked. They've got time to focus on the individual customers that they're talking to. They have time to breathe in between the tasks that they're being assigned. They don't ever have, unless it's like the holiday season or something really big is going on, they don't ever have an overwhelming amount of work to do. They don't have an overwhelming amount of customers, typically. If you're in a city, maybe it's a little different. In a bigger metropolitan area, not on the outskirts of a metropolitan area, but right in the middle of things where everything's packed. And, but maybe not so much the hardware store in that case, but you get the point. When you go into these stores, not just the hardware store, but the electronics store, the department store even, or clothing store, wherever you're going for your different items, each one is sufficiently staffed. Each one, the people who work there are familiar with the specific niche that you need help with. They have time to talk to you. They're encouraged to talk to you. Talking to you and helping you is part of their business model, part of what keeps them afloat and keeps customers coming in, right? And yeah, you need to make 3 or 4 stops, but at each one, you're supporting a single business, maybe a small independent business, maybe like a mom and pop shop kind of a thing. Certainly less common these days than it once was, though not unknown. But you are supporting a specific individual business that has a niche that is very likely owned locally, or at least the higher level employees are probably locals. So that means when you spend the money there, the money goes back into the economy of the city, town, whatever that you're in. Now, let's think about Walmart. Walmart, you walk into the store and it's gigantic, it's huge. It has a lot of people in it typically, it's seldom do you find a Walmart that doesn't have lines going out the door, especially, well, not out the door, but, quite long lines, especially these days when there are fewer and fewer tellers at individual registers. They may have a decent number of employees going around stocking and things like that, but usually not so many that they're like ready to come to you once you come into the store and ask you what you need help with. You may be able to find one after a little bit of searching and ask them where something is, but the chances that they know much about the particular thing that you're looking for, unless you get lucky or unless you're in more of a specialized area like their computer section, is pretty low. You're more likely going to be dealing with a situation where they're understaffed, where they don't have any particular expertise at the area where you need something, right? Just because they happen to work in the Walmart doesn't mean that they know what the best shovel is or what the best shovel for for digging in rocky soil versus in sand or whatever, that's not really probably going to be something they're super familiar with. They're probably not being paid as well, maybe in actual dollars monetarily versus the 90s. Obviously, minimum wage has gone up, but in comparison to inflation, it hasn't really. It's in a lot of ways stagnated, so they're potentially making less money in an economic picture than they would be in previous years. And when you finally get everything that you're looking for together, first of all, the quality of a lot of it's going to be lower. A lot of what would have been, when you're buying clothes, a lot of what would have been natural fibers and things that are made to last are now these fast fashion, 6 kinds of plastic, falling apart by the time you get out of the store. It's melting the minute it hits a dryer. You get a little puffball hat and you put it in on medium heat and you take it out and it's this weird crumpled together mess. So the entire experience has gone downhill a bit, right? You also are dealing with fewer employees for the amount of stuff that's there, right? So where you maybe had 4 or 5 employees at the hardware store, maybe 2 or 3 employees at the electronics store, maybe 6 or 8 employees at the clothing store, or even 1 or 2, you now have this one big shop that covers the range of maybe 8 or 10 different niche stores, but only employs a fraction of what those stores would employ, pays them less, both in terms of real value and quite possibly in terms of, relation to the minimum wage than they might be making at a store where it's a smaller business, where the people that they work for and with actually interact with them on a daily basis. People at Walmart have never met a Walton. The vast majority, they may not even be aware of their individual names. They may not even have met a C-level employee from Walmart, right? They've met maybe some managers, some supervisors. Even the managers haven't met a Walton. So you have this situation where Walmart is more efficient in a way than the 8 or 10 stores that you had that were nearby. But that efficiency is literally cutting out value. And when we talk about efficiency, that's what we mean. Efficiency is doing quote-unquote more with less, but the real emphasis is on the less. It's on the fewer employees. More labor extracted from those employees per hour. People who work at Walmart, they're walking miles a day at times, just getting from one end of the store to the other and back. When you were in a small hardware store, you would have to be running laps to cover that amount of distance. Things are closer together in that kind of a situation. And while it may seem like, okay, I just go into Walmart and I get all my stuff, yeah, but you have to walk, a quarter mile from one end to the other. Maybe not that far. I haven't measured a Walmart, but there's all of this consolidation. And the most insidious part, the worst part, is the consolidation of the economics. When you had your 8 or 10 stores, you go and you buy your shovel. Some of the money for that shovel goes to the person at the counter. Some of the money for that shovel goes to their supervisor. Probably a good portion of the money of that shovel goes to the owner of the store, and then some of the stores, a good portion of it goes to the upkeep of the store itself, right? The actual cost of doing business. But the profits from that are going more or less locally, right? The person who gets those profits is going to go out to dinner at a restaurant maybe down the street or the next town over, or a couple of towns over. They're going to be eating somewhere where that same formula applies again, where once again the money is primarily going to the people who work in that restaurant, the people who manage that restaurant, who own that restaurant locally, and then the overhead for the restaurant itself. It takes the money that is required to do business and that is paid into the business, and it keeps it local. Whereas if you look at a Walmart, the money is not being kept local. The vast majority of the profit is being shipped off to shareholders or to the Waltons or to people who don't live anywhere near where that Walmart is. This is part of the reason why we see poverty increasing when these towns or areas of a city get a Walmart nearby, because money is being siphoned off out of the lifeblood of that town, so that instead of recirculating and enriching the people around, it goes into this big money vacuum, and it just gets sucked up along with the money from hundreds of other towns. Not to mention that in a lot of cases, these Walmarts were given a deal by the town when they were first brought in. You had people who really wanted to attract a Walmart to their town, not being aware clearly of how insidious and harmful it could be, or if they were aware, being more interested in a payout perhaps. But they're often given deals on taxes, for land ownership, for running the business. They cut them a deal to have that plot of land. And the way that they handle that plot of land, they have this massive plot of land with this massive parking lot. And it's like a salted earth situation. When that Walmart's gone, nothing else is going to be there other than maybe like a little strip mall or something like that. But you got a big parking lot to deal with now. Versus, if there's a hardware store and they take up an area a tenth of the size of a Walmart with a parking lot meant to accommodate their small niche of business, that can be reused to be something else that's reasonably sized, like another reasonably sized business. It can be deconstructed, demolished. You can rip up the parking lot and you can let something grow there, right? It can be returned to a natural space if you need it to be. You could make a baseball field, but you're not going to do that with a Walmart. You have this huge parking lot. You're not going to rip up the amount of money it's going to take to rip up this huge parking lot and give it back to nature. It's not going to happen. Maybe on its own time, in hundreds of years or something like that, but you have this space in the meantime. Maybe you can put down more buildings in that area, but you have this limitation now that you have this huge building, and unless you find some way to break it up or something like that, which isn't something we see a lot of, the only thing that can go in there is another huge business, right? Another big consolidated money-eating thing, and that's not usually something that a small business has the finances for. Not to mention, it's very unlikely that Walmart's going anywhere anyway. At least certainly not until all the rest of the value is drained out of the area and it becomes difficult to build it. And this isn't just Walmart. Walmart is perhaps the most visible example, and it's maybe one of the more visceral examples because you can see it. You've been there. You know what it's like there. Maybe you've been to towns where they still have a main street, and they still have some local businesses and things like that. Or maybe you remember a time when there were more towns that had these local businesses. But a Walmart is something visceral that we can look at. But it's not limited to Walmart. This is what we see with economic consolidation across the board. Let's look at Uber, right? Uber is another one of these situations where you have this company that their entire purpose is to consolidate economic value and extract it. Extract it from the local region that it originally exists in. If you have a taxi company and it's a locally owned taxi company, first of all, you're providing the service of driving people around, right? But you're also providing jobs for local taxi drivers. You're providing jobs for mechanics. You're providing jobs for hardware stores and, local gas stations, upholsterers, cleaners, everything that you're doing there is localized. Whereas with Uber, you are not only not providing these opportunities for someone to go, start a business and have a taxi company and elevate their life in that way, and maybe elevate their friends' lives by giving them a job opportunity that they wouldn't have had otherwise, becoming a fixture in a town that is part of what makes that town work. Instead, you have this faceless company, and the only people that are associated with it are people who are doing it short term, usually for a little bit of money. They're not largely making those connections in the town. You probably don't know your Uber driver the same way that you may know the taxi driver that, you talk to, that's a human being that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. And there are going to be times when, if it's not profitable at that particular hour for your Uber driver to show up, they're not going to be there. There are so many people who cancel rides, right? Well, they'll pick up the Uber ride and then they'll cancel it, especially in smaller areas. Maybe this isn't such a big deal in metropolitan areas because there are more drivers, and they're a little less face-to-face anyway, right? When you've got 10 taxi companies and they're all employing 100 cabbies, the chances that you really get to know one of them are maybe a little slim. But if you live in a college town, or you live in a more, not rural, because these are often still in metropolitan areas, that's a whole other bag of worms, but areas where you have a small enough population density that you get these face-to-face interactions that are repeated, where maybe the cab company has 10 drivers, 20 drivers, something like that. And if you are habitually getting a cab at the same time on the same days, there's a very good chance that you're going to keep running into the same people, right? Regulars, like this becomes a real social relationship in a way that an Uber doesn't necessarily get a chance to. And it also has this filter of the cab companies themselves. So with a real face-to-face interaction, as opposed to a number system, you've got Uber, you have ratings for drivers, ratings for customers, whatever. But those don't reflect a relationship. Those reflect an individual circumstance. Was somebody pleased? Were they not pleased? You don't know whether there was a good reason for that rating or not a good reason. You can see the general scope of how many ratings of a particular number somebody gets, but you don't know why. Whereas if you have a cab company, there are relationships involved that give more context to that. The dispatcher and the owner of the company probably know their drivers. They've interacted with them hundreds of times, thousands of times. They interact with them on a daily basis, right? And they talk to them regularly. They know them to a degree. They may not be, opening up about all their issues or whatever, but they have a pretty good idea of who they are and what they're like and what their interactions with other people are like. So when there's some kind of aberration, when there's, say, an unreasonable customer or a creepy driver, that's something that they're more able to call out. It's something that they're more able to see the reality of, instead of basing it purely on these depersonalized feedback mechanisms where, you can leave a comment with some faceless corporate online post box that, you're never going to hear back from, or that the best you get is a form email, or maybe you call somebody who has no authority to do anything anyway. Or on the other hand, even the drivers don't have really direct contact with the people that they're working for. And once again, it's a situation of sucking up all the money and sending it somewhere far away to people who already are collecting a lot of money from a lot of other places. So it contributes to this separation, this increase in the economic distance between the working class and the owning class. And you can continue with this. You can even go back. The beginnings of this are even happening, in that era of shops on the street. I say 1996. We already had malls in 1996 where there's similar phenomenon, maybe not as extreme, but we have a lot of malls, a lot of department stores, things like that, corporate chains. So this isn't new, but what it is it's an increase in an effect that's been going on for a long time. It's a steady continuation of a centralized and consolidated economic model over a distributed model. There's less feedback. You have fewer people who are actually able to have a job that is decent, and you have a greater amount of work hours and labor per hour per worker. I think that's a measure that gets missed in a lot of our economic modeling. There's a value to labor itself. And the more that companies are running on skeleton crews, the more that they're running on, understaffed situations where they're relying on employees for more labor per hour, that devalues labor, right? Like if you have to walk a quarter mile per hour versus 30 feet per hour, that's a huge difference. And you're getting probably paid about the same for both. Like maybe, if anything, you might be getting paid a little more than minimum wage, say, in a local hardware store versus a Walmart situation, literally just because there isn't this big corporate structure that can be there to remove your face from the equation, to remove the interpersonal relationships, and not to say that there aren't abuses that happen in small businesses, because there absolutely are, and in some cases, those corporate regulations can insulate people from that. But in many cases, it's that small business relationship keeps it human and keeps it so that they have an amount of wiggle room that you would never have at a Walmart. Maybe you don't have a dental plan, right? But maybe your employer knows you, and if you're late a few times, they're not going to just kick you out the door because that's what the corporate policy says, right? Maybe they are more understanding to the days you need off. Maybe they're more understanding in general, easier to deal with. You're not dealing with some rule structure where people can just depersonalize everything and act like they're not working with human beings. I could go on about this all day. It covers so many different industries, and this process is so advanced at this point. It's so far along that it seems intractable. It seems like there isn't a way out sometimes. But the reality is that it's eventually a self-defeating mechanism, because it's not sustainable, right? There's a certain point at which they squeeze too hard. And I think we're close to that point in a lot of cases where these companies are extracting value from small communities, from individuals, at a rate that they can't sustain, and every year they have this need to continually expand in a way that literally isn't sustainable. There's not an infinite amount of labor on the planet. There is not an infinite amount of human beings on the planet. There's not an infinite weight of exploitation that humans can sustain before poverty brings things to a level that the entire model falls apart. You can only sell so much cheap shit and pay people nothing for it until nobody can afford your cheap shit anymore. By that point, is there going to be so much plastic in the drinking water that we might as well be guzzling melted straws? I don't know. But I think the more that we're aware of this, and the more that we push back against it, the more that we have an opportunity to do something about it. there is one thing that I want to touch on before I finish this up, and that is the logical extreme of this is Amazon. You look at Amazon, and they've consolidated everything. There's nobody there at a counter to talk to. There's nobody there to help you figure out what it is you actually need. You have customer reviews, which are just them outsourcing the work for free to their customers. You have, maybe you have reviews online, but that's more and more getting into just being AI schlock that these companies put out themselves. That's a topic for another day. But these models are unsustainable. And the more that people realize that, my hope is that they start to intentionally invest in their own local areas, in their own towns. Don't go to Walmart. Go to your local hardware store and steal it free. Don't order something on Amazon. Go to a local clothing store. Go to a consignment shop. Where you have something like consignment shops. Let's just quickly pivot, right? Because you go to Walmart and you buy some clothes, you're buying a piece of plastic that was made in the past, 6 months or year or whatever. You're gonna wear it, it's gonna fall apart, it's gonna end up in a landfill, and it's just gonna be more plastic in our drinking water and our bodies, right? Whereas if you go to a consignment shop, that stuff was made decades ago in a lot of cases, right? So first of all, you know that it lasts because it hasn't fallen apart yet. That already, it's above what you're gonna get at Walmart because it's not disintegrated. But you have this stuff that it allows local people to make a little bit of money by selling their old clothes, right? It allows a local business owner to have a business, usually in a lot of cases just one person or a couple of people, like consignment shops are not heavily staffed. And yet you do get that level of care that you're not going to get in Walmart. Nobody's going to walk around Walmart with you and help you pick out an outfit. But that will happen and does happen in a consignment shop. So, environmentally, it's a better bet. In terms of your actual value that you're getting out of it, it's a better bet, and it's a better bet for your community. And there's a lot of stuff like that. Maybe that's one of the most readily visible, but if we can identify the other areas where that's the case and lean into that, we're all going to benefit. So I hope we do that in the long run. I hope we find those ways to bring the money back into our own towns. And even if you had all the money in the world, right? This is what gets me about this. Because even the people who are sitting at the top of this, right? They're sucking up all the profits. They're making all this money. But they're making the world shittier for themselves. Like they could be having as much money as they would need, right? And living in a better world in which to spend that money and enjoy the world that they're in. But instead they choose to just scrape as much as possible out, just to have a bigger number, to have worse stuff. Because they don't get to go down to the main street either, Maybe they can go to some rich person's store or whatever. They can go to some big fancy overpriced shit and they can get a little bit of stuff. But really, you're gonna tell me that you don't appreciate aesthetics when you walk down the street? You're gonna tell me that when you're wearing clothing, that's cool. You can get some nice clothing and it looks good. You really want to see everybody else in plastic rags? Really? You want to inhale the plastic fibers coming off of their falling apart ass clothes that you're forcing on them? Really? I don't know. Maybe those kind of people aren't going to listen to this. Maybe nobody is. But it blows my mind that people would want to make a worse world for them to live in. Because to me, having less proportionate power, right, in a better world is more valuable than having greater power in a shittier world. Something to think on.